Hi everyone, and welcome to our special webinar today. My name's Sarah White and I'm the new Head of Communications, the Head of Strategic Communications for the Australia-India Institute. I've only started 4 days ago, so I'm very excited for this to be my first event. Today we're listening to a really interesting talk. It's going to go for about 20 minutes with Hari Bapuji. It's about the invisible inequalities of business and society and who should care. But more interestingly, Hari's looked at the idea of the caste system and why that's so overlooked in Indian society, particularly in government and the higher echelons. So welcome, Hari, and I welcome you to give your presentation, and we will go to a Q&A straight after.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining. Just let me quickly share my screen. I hope it's looking good. Okay, once again, so today is Diwali, so happy Diwali to everyone. And today is also a good day to say Tamosoma Jyotirgamaya, that is lead me from darkness to light. So let's try and understand what invisible inequalities are in business and society and why we should care about them. And as Sarah has explained, my focus will be on caste system and caste inequalities in business and society. So in terms of the agenda, I'm going to talk about why we should care about inequality, because it's a question that people ask me all the time, like, why should there be full equality? Isn't inequality good for business and society? And then I'm going to explain what I mean by invisible inequalities, and then talk about the implications of caste to business and society, and then we move on to Q&A. So this is one of the questions that is commonly asked to me, like, why do we need to have equality in business and society? So to clarify, I'm not saying that there should be perfect equality. And also I'm not referring to wealth or income inequality per se here. What I'm interested in, or what I'm talking about when we discuss inequalities, is what inequalities do to people, business and societies, right? So when we say economic inequality, we have defined it as uneven distribution in the endowment and our access to financial and non-financial resources in a society, which manifests in differential abilities and opportunities to engage in value creation, appropriation, and distribution. Okay, so I know that's a mouthful and it's a very long definition. So I'm going to quickly explain what it is, right? So by endowments, we mean what you have, like economic capital, wealth, assets. So if you have a lot of inequality and economic capital, that can lead to inequalities in other things. But what we are really interested in are, in case of invisible inequalities, what is really more important is the social capital, cultural capital, and symbolic capital, right? So what you have is the endowments, and access is what you can get to health and education, and access to markets and institutions, which influence employment and entrepreneurship. And using this, what is it that you can make? That is your compensation, mobility, status, and security, etc. So by value creation, appropriation, distribution, what we mean is that in businesses or in organizations, we create goods and services that people are willing to buy, right? And then we also appropriate that value that we create, that is making the goods and services at the lowest cost, possible cost, and selling them at the highest cost possible, that is at the price closest to a consumer's willingness to pay. And when we talk about distribution, we're talking about the allocation of the surplus or retained earnings among those who contributed resources to value creation and appropriation. So this is the model that we have to explain economic inequality, and we argue that businesses play a central role in maintaining and increasing inequality in society. So that is one. And the second is that it is now recognized that economic inequalities also reduce economic growth and prosperity at a country level, right? So this is one study that has been done by Citigroup, for example, and other consulting organizations also have done similar studies. What they say is that if you can achieve some level of equality between the black and white populations in the US, that would mean that the US economy would add about $1 trillion to its GDP. Just for figures, like that's, US GDP is $21 trillion and white population is about 71% and black population is about 14%. And also to give you comparison points, Australian GDP is 1.33 trillion and India's is 2.6 trillion. So we're talking about almost as much economic growth as what Australia has on an annual basis, right? That's the missed GDP for US because of discrimination or inequalities between black and white populations, right? And similarly, this has been seen for female participation, and female participation in labor force is low in India, that we all know, and that's the reason why economists track, because we know that getting more people into the workforce and providing more opportunities actually helps the businesses and societies, right? So now come to inequalities, right? So if you look at this picture, I'm sure all of you would recognize that this is from the Situation Room when Osama bin Laden was being killed, and here you can tell clearly that there is not much of a racial or gender diversity, right? You can only see two people there, one sitting at the table. Sorry, two women there, one sitting at the table, and Obama is there. So maybe you can count him as adding the racial diversity, but you can tell clearly, right? So those are visible inequalities, and you can see this across countries. So this is, and when you see this kind of pictures, you can tell that there isn't much diversity, and this gets called out all the time, right? So here again, on the right-hand side, you have the Toto companies, which is a Japanese company, its board of directors, all of them being Japanese men. And on the left-hand side, you have a picture of all the directors of IITs and technical institutes. Here, the person who's tweeting happens to be a director himself, and he said that without it changing, India can never be a superpower, right? So you can see that there is lack of gender diversity here, right? But if you look at this, for example, this is Infosys board of directors. You can see that there is gender diversity, and then there is also racial diversity. There are two white people there and two women that we can see. And this is the TCS board of directors. Once again, you can see a couple of women, a couple of white people. But what you don't know when you see this is that we cannot tell what is the caste diversity here, right? How many of them belong to what caste, right? And also we cannot tell what is the class diversity, right? We can only tell, what we can see or what we can infer in terms of their demographics, in terms of their gender and probably skin color, right? But we can't tell about class or caste. But if you know a little bit about the last names and all, you can tell that most of the people of Indian origin, or most of the directors of Indian origin, happen to come from a couple of castes, the upper caste. Right? And that is exactly the reason why it is, when this person tweeted this picture and talked about gender inequality in the lead up to the International Women's Day, it wasn't mentioned, or nothing was mentioned about the caste inequality or even class inequality. But we know that the directors of various top institutes in India come from the most privileged caste, or at the very top end of the caste hierarchy. So, for example, here you can see, if you look at all the IIM faculty, 95% of them come from what is known as the general category. But Professor Deepak Malgan of IIM Bangalore says that 90% of the faculty at IIMs come from the castes which represent 10% of the population, right? So this gives us an idea or gives us an opportunity to think about what is visible and invisible inequalities, right? So by visible inequalities, we mean those that are driven by apparent and noticeable attributes of individuals and groups like gender, race, age, appearance, disability, and ethnicity. And invisible inequalities are those that arise from invisible attributes that are driven by a system that maintains advantage and disadvantage based on social group memberships, right? So this could be like caste, class, culture, a whole range of them, but I'm going to discuss about caste. And these are generally ascribed to individuals at birth. They are not chosen by individuals, although some can be voluntarily selected, like religion. And they can be discerned, although they are invisible in some sense that you can't tell by appearance. You can find out by using context-specific material or what is known as discourse manifestations, like a language, your rituals, signs, and symbols. And these dimensions are internalized by the privileged and disadvantaged. So as a result, it becomes challenging to address them. And they can be normalized as culture, identity, and personal preferences. So as a result, they operate in ways that are difficult to understand or difficult to see. And that is why they're often overlooked and they remain unaddressed. And whenever we talk about inequalities with respect to caste, in general, the idea in both among management research and practice is that there is no caste inequality. We only focus on merit, right? So I'm going to talk about what the caste is in terms of system of inequality. All of you must have heard about the caste system in terms of like various castes or various varnas. But more than that, what it really does is that it categorizes people into different types. It says that there is a logic or there is a reason why people are of different types and arranges them hierarchically in a graded fashion. And those positions are fixed and you cannot really move up. And that position determines or influences resources and opportunities. And most importantly, each group conducts according to their position, right? So most life interactions happen within the group and cross-group interactions are prohibited now. Now let's see, although I'm going to talk about how that is in a moment, but it's important to clarify that caste is not limited to India or Hinduism. It is prevalent globally across many countries where South Asian populations have migrated. And it's also part of many religions now. So let's look at the caste example, right? So caste is given to individuals at birth based on father's caste, right? It's not chosen by individuals and you cannot discard it. And it can be identified by a combination of factors like your last names and sometimes by name, food habits, your level of wealth and education, because historically, like the resources have been allocated based on caste, like based on the level of wealth and education or level of current wealth and education. You can tell what the caste is and where you live in a particular city or village, and occupations of forefathers, because now the things are changing, but the occupations were fixed earlier. What you wear, what kind of ornaments you wear, and who you worship, and there are a lot of cultural markers like this. These are all the ways that you can indirectly infer, but of course, it's not uncommon for people to ask directly what caste they belong to. And in many occasions, it does happen, right? And we talked about how these invisible inequalities are internalized by people, both who are of the privileged and the disadvantaged groups. So the privileged groups say that, they have Aryan genes, that's why they're superior. Or they say that we have generationally accumulated the wealth and skills, or we are specialized, so we are better now. Right? And when it comes to the disadvantaged groups, they internalize inferiority in terms of helplessness, because you really can't change any of these kind of things. And comes the question of normalization. How do we normalize caste inequalities? Like they can be normalized as cultural heritage. our identity, and they can be rationalized as within caste marriage being good for compatibility, or to simply say that, like, it is my sensibilities, or I have my food preferences. I don't want to mix with people who have different kind of food preferences, right? So that is why it becomes difficult to detect in organizations. So although we cannot say it, the caste system maintains and increases inequality in society. We do have a paper on this, which you might want to take a look at. And these are some examples of how caste is maintained through last names, are preventing people from accessing a lot of things, including education, preventing people from grooming, and really engaging in practices that are dehumanizing, right? So as a result of this invisible fashion in which the inequalities operate, what you see is that what we call as the homogeneity in the upper echelons, right? So if you look at the caste affiliations of the board of directors, as I was mentioning earlier, 90% of them come from groups which probably represent about less than 10% of the population. Let's be a bit more generous on that. And nearly all of them come from groups that are about 15%, right? So this is one statistic that you might want to remember, right? And the same caste occupations assignment that has happened over the years, that gets carried over now in terms of how the elite occupations are predominantly filled in by those who come from the higher caste, and the lower occupations are predominantly filled in by those who come from the lower caste, right? And so what we say is that because of this kind of invisible ways in which caste becomes prevalent, caste becomes manifest in organizations, the internal organization would tend to be homogeneous, right? So the top echelons are coming from the upper caste, and lower echelons are coming from the lower caste. And it also affects the industry value chains or supply chains, with high value activities being predominantly pursued by those who come from upper caste, and the low value activities being pursued by those who come from the lower caste. And there could be some changes based on what kind of organization, whether it's a family, a business, or business group, or state-owned organization, because of the affirmative action. And these are and depending on where the company's operations are, the caste effect can be very strong, moderate, or weak. We wouldn't have time to explain all of these things, but I just wanted to give a few things so that we can have a discussion, right? And next, I'm going to show you a few things which are kind of a food for thought, right? So here, Kamala Harris, whose mother has married a Black person, and this is an interview that she gave, where she said that she talks about her Brahmin heritage, right, and how caste how it is not class, and that is the top caste, right? And here again, like where Vishal Sikka, who used to be the CEO of Infosys, mentions that is a Kshatriya warrior. He's there to fight. This was in the context of a boardroom battle that he mentions this. Right? And then Indra Nooyi, much celebrated CEO, and in pretty much every interview about her life, one of the things that she definitely says is that she's a Brahmin, and she's vegetarian. She has a puja room and all of those things. There's nothing wrong with it, but when you think of the rest of the things that go with it, that is what becomes problematic, or that's what makes it makes it normal for these kind of things to happen. So here, what she says is that, like, when you get 100%, or that her mother has encouraged her to get 100% in maths. So she says it's a typical Southern Brahmin stuff, right? Now tell me which parent would want their kids to fail or not get 100%, right? So it is here you're using the most desirable qualities or most aspirations and ascribing them as a stereotype to one particular caste, right? Here again, like as I was mentioning, like how it operates in very, very invisible fashion, right? So here, like this, the canteen owner of a particular temple in New York is saying that all the chefs working here are Hindu priests, they're all Brahmins, right? And when Air France has started its direct flight operations to Paris from India, this is the ritual that was conducted. Again, it can be seen as culture, but who conducts it is the one who happens to be a Brahmin, right? And we talked about the food habits before, and we, this is something that I picked from social media, how vegetarian and non-vegetarian, the microwaves are different, and in fact, at IIT Madras or IIT Chennai, they try to segregate people in terms of the sinks as well as the entrances, if I remember well. So this happens often. And how this can affect multinational corporations, we've seen it through the case of Twitter CEO, who, when he used this Brahminical patriarchy poster, which really is like white privilege equivalent, that really created a major controversy and resulted in the company apologizing, right? And here Facebook has issued an advertisement in which it tells people how to block trolls. I'm going to quickly share this, play this advertisement. I hope it works.
भी बड़े इरिटेटिंग बंदे मिल जाते हैं, मुझे ना इनसे बात ही नहीं करनी है। फेसबुक कुछ हो सकता है क्या?
बिल्कुल, उस यूजर के प्रोफाइल पे ब्लॉक क्लिक कीजिए और लो हो गया।
In case you're wondering, this advertisement was withdrawn because the last name here clearly shows that this person is from the lowest caste in the caste hierarchy, and given that it is typically given that the lower castes have limited presence on internet, the idea that highlighting them as those who troll was seen as undesirable. So Facebook, it was criticized, and then Facebook removed this advertisement, right? And then we have seen the case of Cisco, where the California state has sued Cisco, alleging that there was caste discrimination against one particular employee, where two upper caste managers have outed him and mentioned about his caste, and that resulted in his segregation and then denial of career opportunities and all that. And then we've also seen a lot of others who come forward to give testimonials about working in the Silicon Valley and the problems that they face. And nearly all of them say, like, they dread working for a manager of Indian origin, because they can figure out the caste and then they can ill-treat them, right? And here, like, it's one advertisement where, or a couple of advertisements where they talk about, either Brahmins only or Agarwal Vaish applicants only. And when it was pointed out, they said, no, we meant to say vegetarians only, right? So what can we do to address some of these things? So a few things. The first, I think we need to call it caste. There is a great reluctance among researchers and practitioners and pretty much everyone who has idea about the caste system. They don't want to call it caste. They call it clan, they call it class, they call it social group, they call it community. They find any number of ways to call it, but they refuse to call it caste. Okay. So that's the first and foremost important thing. And the second thing is to really recognize the comprehensiveness of caste, right? Caste is, as I mentioned, it operates invisibly, but also it operates in multiple fashions. It operates as identity, it operates as last name, it operates as as food preferences, a whole bunch of things. So come together to operate as caste. So it's important to recognize how comprehensive it is and how complete it is, right? And third, we need to recognize that it's a global problem. It no longer is restricted to India or South Asia, but it has become a global problem, right? And then we need to study its prevalence in different country contexts, because depending on the kind of populations that are there, the way caste manifests in different country contexts is going to be very, very different, right? And then we need to study it in different organizational contexts, right? So in software or in IT, it is going to be in one way, and in manufacturing sectors, it is going to be in another way in terms of what kind of stereotypes play and all of those things. So it's important to see depending on the organizational context as well. And just as we have studied how the lack of gender diversity, lack of racial diversity causes losses to companies, causes loss to countries in terms of the economic growth, it is also important to study and quantify some of these losses because of these inequalities, and then share them so that some actions can be taken, right? And then finally, we need to take measures to address these kind of inequalities. So with that, I'd like to stop and thank you for your attendance, and we can now go for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hari. And for those who arrived a little later, Hari Bapuji is the Professor of Strategic Management and International Business at the University of Melbourne. That was really fascinating. I thought when you talked about what measures we can take, Hari, do you have any examples of what measures we could take in Australia to eliminate this caste system or inequality?
Yeah, at the moment, I think one of the most important things is to really recognize it. What we see in terms of experience of other countries is that both in UK and US and to some extent in Canada, is that the cases of caste discrimination have come up. People have started to talk about, they've been taken to courts, but it has become difficult for them to be dealt with because there is no category as caste that is recognized in various countries and various companies. So if you don't recognize it, if you don't advertise it as a category, then what happens is that people who face caste discrimination don't go to talk about that, right? They don't raise it because it is seen as probably that is not recognized, right? And for example, in case of Cisco, when this person actually took it to the managers a few times, they said, yeah, it seems like something happened there, but we can't really do anything because caste discrimination is not illegal or it's not outlawed here, right? So I'm obviously this is I'm paraphrasing it to make the message simple, but this is exactly what they say, right? In terms of the message was that we can't do anything because it's not illegal here, right? So that's what they say. So recognizing that, I think, is very important. And then I think unknowingly the kind of things that are done in Western countries in the name of promoting culture, promoting inclusion, those are actually going to strengthen the identities of the people in terms of caste, right? If you look at this various developed countries, including in Australia, there are associations that are based on caste. Okay, and these are the castes that are that go in terms of just identity, but those are the oppressor castes, which are really implicated in a number of atrocities. Right? Now, these people might say that I don't do anything. But the point is that you're normalizing it. And the point is that you don't have to do it. Like, for example, for me to be a man, to get the privileges of being a man, that is to walk into on a street without having to worry about who is following me. I don't need to do anything for it, right? Others are doing. Right? So similarly, if you claim that you are a Brahmin or a Rajput or a Baniya, whatever it is, right? Then you're getting all the advantages, right? So those are the kind of things I think we need to see. I think the countries, the various countries outside, particularly, need to understand that this can create problems in the future because you're in some ways strengthening their caste identities, right? And the caste system as a system is one that grades people as superior and inferior, right? And trust me, that is not going to stop there, right? And everyone would get a caste in a caste system. White people get a caste, black people get a caste, the Asians get a caste. So where they get placed, I think you can pretty much guess, right? So this ideology of superiority is only going to create problem, and we have already seen some cases of that happening here in Australia itself.
Right, well, we're actually getting quite a few questions coming through, and I encourage you all to put your questions in the Q&A box. The first one is from Justin. He said, discrimination on caste basis is not on agenda of businesses, despite India being one of the major groups of immigrants working in Western countries or companies. How do we shed awareness about caste in companies, which I think you were talking about with Cisco, considering those who emigrated are generally wealthy and from upper class?
Yeah, so I think this is exactly where I said, like, the idea of that a number of upper castes think that they're not doing anything about caste, right? They have no role to play in it and all that. So they need to recognize, or at least the education needs to go into say how everything that you do, it is there in your name, it is there in how you conduct, it's there in who you socialize with, it's there in who you marry, right? So it is important to recognize that and educate that these are the ways in which the caste gets reproduced. It is not that you're telling somebody, no, I don't want to interact with you because you're a Dalit or you're an Adivasi or nobody does that, right? Who you include, who you exclude, right? So those are the things that people need to recognize, and that education is very important, and it's not going to happen very easily. Men have not become sensitized to gender inequality overnight. It has taken centuries and decades of education movements and policies and training, right? So similarly, we would have to identify those and then talk about how caste operates and educate people, and everyone needs that education. Okay, everyone needs that education. Yeah.
And on that, Sergey has also asked a question, which is a really good point. Could you ever describe caste as discrimination? So particularly in Australia, could the Australian government legislate the caste system as a form of discrimination?
I think it should.
We are writing.
Yeah.
Writing.
Yeah, I think it should, and I think universities should do that. I think organizations should do that, and more broadly, I think that there should be some discussion about how do we try to when there are local inequality systems get migrated to global locations. How do we deal with those inequalities? I think that's a broader question that needs to be addressed. And specifically about caste, I would definitely say that that recognition is required. Yeah.
And you've alluded to the fact that with discrimination against men and women, for example, with women, it may be small behaviours along a long period of time that then culminates in a sense of discrimination. It seems like that would be the same for a caste system. So there was a question also from Sonia who kind of alluded to that as well. Does caste system emerge through religion, or is it in our minds on who believes is superior or inferior?
Is it in our mind?
She also said, is it, how are we supposed to change our thinking? And I guess that more modern example of discrimination against women, that thinking is changing, and do we need to see that happen with the caste system?
Yes. So I think similar again, like there's no other thing than education, and obviously, like as a professor, I would definitely say that, right? So so education is the key, and education doesn't mean like somebody else will tell you. It is your own reflection. It's your own idea, or your own on your own trying to find out, right? So try to see like how many in your network are people of your caste or similar caste, right? And how many are upper and how many are lower, right? So those are the kind of things I think we need to do as individuals, right? And it took me again, like I still get amazed, not amazed actually. I'm still surprised by how much I find out every day about either gender or racial inequality or caste inequality in terms of the ways in which that operates, right? And the effect that it has on people. And it, yeah, even today, like I'll see something, then I recognize, oh God, I couldn't have thought of this as influenced by caste or race or gender, right? So
it's fascinating that you're still surprised the more and more you research it. There's another question here from Mudit who said, can you comment on this dual identity space that upper caste settlers occupy in the diaspora, where they become Brahmins when there needs to be segregate with food spaces, and become Indians when they need to homogenize to gain access to diversity spaces? Very complex question there.
Yes, yeah, no, yeah, this is an issue that that has been coming up in the recent past, because I've seen that in my interactions with a number of colleagues from particularly from India, right? They are happy to recognize racial diversity or racial inequalities. They're happy to research gender inequality. There are a lot of people who are researching, and there should be more. But when it comes to caste inequality, they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to discuss it, because they see it as something that either I have no clue. Actually, they should tell what is the reason why they don't do it. So when it comes to race, they're in Australia or in the Western countries, they're happy to march with Black Lives Matter and talk about racial injustice, but they don't talk about the problems that are there that would come from their own context, right? So that would mean the exclusion of people of lower castes here from the majority spaces. And also, what happens is that, like, when you ask for racial diversity, and this is what we are in fact seeing in a lot of countries and companies, is that in the name of promoting multiculturalism, a lot of these people who are wealthier, who come from upper class, upper caste, and otherwise privileged, they get a lot of benefit in terms of their visibility, in terms of their promotions and all of those things. And those positions they're now using to suppress the discussion about other types of inequalities, or suppress the discussions about the privilege of the upper caste, upper class people, right? So that, I think, is going to be problematic, and that makes it actually even more challenging, because they're in more senior positions, and they are much more powerful and much more resourceful than those who are trying to talk about inequalities. So
yeah, exactly. But also, I guess we've talked about it from the Australian point of view, of you saying it should be a form of discrimination. What about from the Indian government? We have a question from Mukesh, who says social security is one of the reasons that the caste system is still rampant in rural India. What do you think the government or society as a whole can do to deal with it apart from legal measures? Is there a social way they can deal with it in rural India?
Yeah, so I think on this, if I remember well, Tarun Ketan has written about this, and at some point. So what happened is that the affirmative action has been a top-down kind of an initiative, right? But the discourse about caste discourse about inequalities in general, that has moved away, that has stopped, and the discourse is more about now how do we modernize and how do we gain economic progress. And in the process, what happened is that any affirmative action is seen as a compromise on merit. So if we want to grow, we need to use the best people, or we need to develop the best people, irrespective of their background, irrespective of their caste, class, gender, and that resulted in developing a certain class of people, right? And in fact, one of my co-authors, Arun Kumar, he's in UK, and he writes about this in terms of how this quest for development and modernity has resulted in privileging merit without looking at the antecedents, right? So that discourse needs to happen, and that discourse needs to happen both not only in terms of inclusion of different people, and various ways in which this can be achieved, right? So I think a larger discourse needs to happen rather than only at the time of elections or at the time of making policies, right? So that ground level discussion hasn't happened, right? So that's why when you go into the villages or when you go into the to talk to people, like there's general reluctance. They say, "Oh, it's all politics," right? So they simply dismiss it, right? So you want to generate a more honest, a more open, and more informed discussion, right?
Yeah, Lakshmi has actually touched on this as well, and I think you addressed it before about the idea of tokenism, that everyone's happy to say that they want to do something, but is that just a token? She said, is there a few members across organisations similar to gender that you could get to address tokenism within the Indian groups? Yeah,
so I think within the Indian corporates there is no tokenism when it comes. There isn't even tokenism when it comes to caste diversity, right? There is literally none. They're decidedly against affirmative action, and they say, like, we are just only focused on merit. We don't collect caste data, all of those kind of things. But it is very easy to get the data, because from your last name itself, you can tell, how many of your managers, how many of your senior managers are from the upper caste. You don't really need to do much. You don't need to ask them. So doing that is important, and they've really stalled the discussion on that. And I've over the last few years, I've been talking to people, but everyone says the same thing. We don't want to raise this. It doesn't matter to us. We give equal opportunity to everyone, which basically means we continue to reproduce inequalities, right?
What do you think is going to be the breaking point to have this action? We've seen the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movements. We've seen huge social movements that have really become the breaking point for those issues. Where do you see that going with the caste system?
I mean, I'm not a sociologist or political science person to talk about social movements. But yes, that's a possibility. But I, on the other hand, also believe that the amount of progress that we made in terms of gender and race has not been. I mean, we made a lot of progress. There's no doubt about it, right? And even with respect to caste, we made a good amount of progress. There's also no doubt about it. But so that has not become possible without the involvement of the corporates, without the involvement of the businesses, and without the encouragement of the universities, right? So if we talk about the Indian context, universities have not tried to do this in a more inclusive fashion, and they have often resisted affirmative actions or quotas or reservations in the name of compromising merit, right? So those things, they need to be more proactive. The corporates and universities need to be more proactive to address these kind of things.
Noban's asked a question, and we may have touched on it a little bit, but it's interesting. They said, is regarding the invisible inequalities. It's possible that there are interplays between different types of inequalities. In such a case, it becomes impossible to figure out which is internalized, which is more apparent, and which is prevalent. And how do we account for this?
Can you tell me who asked this question? I'm just trying to.
Noben Thomas from the Q&A.
Oh, okay, yeah, just let me. Yeah, so yes, there is there can be intersectional inequalities. Definitely, there's absolutely no doubt about that. When we there is an argument actually against affirmative action as well in this, that when we talk about affirmative actions, they have been used by those who are the more privileged within the oppressed castes, right? There is no doubt about it, and that's what happens all the time, right? But so the idea there is to recognize that it is not just because you're better off economically or maybe a little bit educationally in terms of the family type, doesn't mean that your social status has increased. So these intersectionalities we have to recognize, but at the same time, I think with respect to caste, it is indelible, unlike others, right? So that I think has to be recognized. And when it comes to research, right, I presume you're asking about this as a research, then yes, there is a very good opportunity for us to tease out this in terms of trying to look at this by adding class, social class, education, and family wealth and parents' education, all of those kind of things, and income, as well as caste. So by doing that, we can tease out. So that hasn't been done, and that work is waiting to be done for sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we're wrapping up in a minute, but if anyone else wants to ask some questions, I guess to finish, we're hearing that the middle class of India is obviously booming at the moment. Where do you think class plays into the idea of capitalism when it becomes more individualistic? Do you see caste playing a role in that?
Yeah, so the middle class is booming, but again, which given that the mobility is become dependent on caste to a large extent, economic mobility. We are once again trying to look at. We are once again talking about a few sections of the society which are moving, right? So I think really if we need to get to the aspirations that we have with respect to India, you need to bring in the vast majorities of the people who have been left behind or who are not really booming in that sense, right? Even if we take about the case of, for example, the women's participation in the labor force. I mean, it's ironical that it is going down when it is going down in pretty much every other Asian country, right? So we need to think about this kind of things and develop measures to address those. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that has been great, Hari. Thank you so much for your time and obvious expertise in such an interesting topic. For anyone who came in late or would like to share this will be on our website and our YouTube shortly. And I'd like to highlight an upcoming event for the Australia-India Institute. It's called Pivot to India, Our Next Great and Powerful Friend, which is with our CEO, Lisa Singh, and Michael Wesley. And it will be on Thursday, the 16th of November at 3:30. So I'd encourage you, if you'd like to know more about it, please go to our website. But thank you again, Hari, for such a great thing. I'm so glad I've started at the Institute only 4 days in. I'm already learning so much. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.